Welcome back to my next video on player pathways in tennis. This is where you will hear what my utopian pathway would be in terms of taking players right from the year dot all the way through, but also taking into account people parachuting into tennis at different ages. Imagine that. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Kris Soutar. Make sure you subscribe, press your notification bell thing, and if you haven't seen the last video on player development, the link is up there right now. So we're going to dive straight in. Today we're going to be unpacking the fundamental and specific skills between 9 and 12, and then looking at game style between 12 and 16. So let's go. So first of all, if we imagine players have travelled through to this phase, then we've still got to respect the fundamentals, and then we start to layer on top of that. And when I say specific skills for the future, what I mean is them being able to apply their technique tactically. So if you think of eight and under kind of players, if they're playing on a mini red court, if they're good enough, they should be playing on an orange or a green court. But when they start to play on those bigger courts with the slightly faster balls, the demands of the game are such that they will have to be able to apply their technique. That means different stances, different things in the hitting phase, like hopping and pivoting and so on. And if that is new jargon to you, check out my videos on unpacking the footwork cycle. Also check out the 3 layers of technique. So we're thinking about this 9 to 12, where they're going to be going from green tennis into yellow ball tennis. So the ball's going to be faster, bouncing higher, take more spin, etc. So it's very, very important that they have this foundation that they can then start to really apply and put into that full court with a yellow ball. If we're looking at the next layer down, we are going to help the players be really smart. So this would be, if you think of this idea of skill development never stops. It just changes, the focus changes. So if one of the things that I would believe passionately in is that we want our tennis players to be problem solvers, because the game of tennis has such high demands in terms of the variation that the opponent can do to the ball. The court is massive, really, especially for this age group. So we need them to be able to understand space, time, know how to use their strengths, know how to minimize the opponent being able to get into the weakness, being able to learn in the game as it goes on, not just afterwards, because at this age group their awareness of what is actually going on is quite low, because they're so worried about results and ego kicks in and so on. So one of the big things I would focus on in this age group is making the players really, really smart, great problem solvers, great at adapting to the game. From there, we would be looking at competition structure, still very much in team. And of course, they're going to play individual competitions at this age group, but I still would prefer if the structure was more team-based at under 12 age group. And then we would be looking at still creating a family environment. So you probably get the gist of this. This isn't going to go away. I really genuinely believe that we have to create an environment where the family can be together. We cater for the adults at the same time as the kids. Also, we involve the parents a lot in the development of their child, because you're missing a trick big time if you neglect the parent, or worse, keep them at arm's length or think that they are just a pain. You need to help create a great relationship so that you're all helping the child. Now, if you have done a great job in the activation and the fundamental stage, that will be easy because you will have the parents on board fully with what you're trying to do. If they've parachuted into tennis and they don't have much sports experience, then you need to really hop on that and make sure that you are very welcoming and get them to understand what your philosophies and principles are, but do not keep them at arm's length, right? So game style. So this is that 12 to 16 years old. Now, depending on their maturation, they will physically mature at different stages. I'm still waiting. I was about 17 before I grew about 5 or 6 inches, and I'm only 5'9", so I was very, very small in this 12 to 16 age group. But what will happen for most people that will grow is you will start to understand what their game will look like heading towards when they're fully grown. So help them build their own individual game and take pride in that. Actually make them feel like they are special, that it's not just they have to follow or copy a model from a tour player and so on. Make them the most complete player you can up to 12, and then start to really focus on their strengths and how they're going to build almost like a tennis identity. Teenagers love that sort of stuff. Now, the game style will be based around the personality of the player, and I put that first because I think it's often overlooked. We tend to have a lot of game styles that are attached purely to physicality. So I heard a story recently about a player who's probably a little bit taller than me, about 5'10" or so, and is very, very quick, and straight away the coaches of, not the coach of the player, but other coaches were saying he needs to model himself on Diego Schwartzman because he's small and nippy, and he needs to be more like a defensive or counter puncher. The guy's personality is he wants to impose his game on his opponents. That's in his DNA, that's in his characteristics. So I think we are missing a trick again if we do not take the personality and the character traits of the player into account. That, for me, that's where it starts. Then you look at the physicality. So if, for example, the player is really, really small and squat and fast and so on, and the personality is very shy and reserved and doesn't like to take risks, then of course it makes more sense to be the counter puncher. So it's really important that you combine those two things in that teenage age group. If we look now, the competition for me, the team still if it's possible, but I think in this age group you're really starting to see what is out there. Now this is where it gets interesting, because most players at a really young age group are having to do this. They're not getting internal competition at their clubs. They're not getting enough local competition. There's not enough layers, because if I'm under 12, I can only play under 12s. You should be able to play up. I was playing with, at 12, 13, I was playing with adults quite a lot. We don't see that happening so much. But if we were allowing kids to play up in different age groups, because there were more tournaments and there was more open play, as in bigger draws, more tableau, progressive draws, then we would have a situation where players wouldn't have to travel so much to compete. They could get a lot of things internally at their club and also locally, so they don't have to drive more than like 15-20 minutes to get good experience of competition. But when they get into this 12 to 16 age group and they're maturing and they're doing well, then you really need to start getting out there and seeing what the levels are, so that you can see where you need to kind of fill the gaps in your game, what you're doing well, what you could do more of that's good, and so on. So I think in that game style thing, make sure that they're still playing a lot locally, because they can play about with their game style a little bit with maybe not so much threat. But when you feel like you want to kind of put them out there and see where they're at, then look for opportunities to test them out. And then finally, they understand the true demands of the game. Now what I mean by that is when they start to compete outside their area, that's when you start to really see the true demands. Now unfortunately, children are seeing those demands way too early. So I remember being a young kid in my primary school and going on a school trip to Stirling. Now I live in the northeast of Scotland, and I absolutely remember that trip feeling like it was to the other side of the world. It was so long. And we are seeing young children, actually sometimes in the fundamental age, travelling 2 or 3 hours to get to a match, play a couple of matches, drive 2 or 3 hours to come back. For me, that is a demand of the game. When you're older, you have to get used to travelling, but there is no one in the world that can convince me that a young kid that is between 7, 8, 9 and 10 should be travelling 5-6 hours in one day to get a couple of matches. It's absolutely insane. So for me, some of the demands of the game are travel. Their demands on nutrition and the fitness really kicks in at this age group, in terms of they will wake up one day and not be able to get out of bed because they have the lactic acid's kicked in and so on. There'll be growing pains, there'll be all sorts of things that really are going to make them realise what the true demands of tennis are. There are so many to list in a video like this. I'll maybe do another video on the demands of the game another time, but we need to educate them on what those are. So things like nutrition, you can't just one day say you're not allowed to have fizzy drinks, you're not allowed to have cooked breakfast, you're not allowed to eat this the night before a match, that you have to eat. You can't just go straight in. You need to drip feed that out, and it might take a little bit of time. And when they are traveling to tournaments, it's an ideal opportunity to help them or help educate them bit by bit, but don't ram it down their throat too soon. In terms of the environment that you create, I've changed it here from family to social club because you're talking about teenagers here. So again, this utopian thing is, and this is something I'm really believe strongly about, is that we need to create as much of a social club environment at our tennis club. That will retain the people that have come from the kind of through the journey, if you like, but it will also attract people that are late developers in tennis. Now, I didn't start playing tennis until I was 12 years old, and I didn't start to really compete until I was just turning 13. Now, if I had come into tennis at that age now, I wouldn't get looking. I would be looked at, I could probably hardly play, I would have been put in some beginner group, and I would have pretty much been forgotten about. If there was a social element there, that might retain me, might retain my attention if my friends are there. So we need to create this social club, almost like an after-school youth club to kind of feel. And I think that there's a massive opportunity to do that in tennis. You might have to fight or work with the committee on that, because a lot of the older generation don't like to see the kids hanging out at the club, but they need to get over that. It's the future is all about this kind of social type environment. So I think that's about enough for today. Please have your say right below. Share these videos. Remember, this is Utopian. I'm kind of spouting things off here that I believe strongly about, and some of you will be sitting thinking, well, I know reasons why that can't happen, or maybe this is too much pie in the sky. Have your say below, but if you've got any other suggestions, then put them down below as well. Tomorrow we'll be looking at that slightly older age group and see what demands there are there. And until then, bye.